Hey there, wherever you're watching from, and whatever hour it happens to be, welcome to Bedtime Universe. Leave your city and the time down in the comments so the stars know where to send their postcards. Now settle in, breathe slow, and let me guide you into a story that unfolded on the quiet edge of our understanding. A story about an interstellar visitor and the small, human moments that met it. They called it 3i, Atlas at first, a tidy tag, for a thing that refused to be tidy. It arrived like a rumor across the gullies and radio dishes of our instruments, a pale whisper against the velvet background of the sky. For days, the feeds filled with numbers, angles, velocities, flux measurements, and an odd, spreading hush that happens when the universe hands humanity a riddle. If you imagine the object as a traveler, then the first thing to know is that it did not rush. Where meteors and comets streaked in quick-handed dramas, 3i Atlas drifted as if reading the pages of the sun's light. It slid into the solar system on an eccentric, unhurried path, its motion traced and retraced by computer models on benches in observatories around the globe. People who study the heavens are a practical lot. They make hypotheses and they puncture them. That is how progress is made, and so hypotheses came first. Pressure from solar photons? Sure, sometimes thin objects slow as sunlight piles up on broad light sails. Outgassing like a comet? Perhaps. A fragment of something tumbling, caught by unseen tides? Possibly. The models said these were all plausible, but observation, patient as tides, said otherwise. It slowed, not once, not in the messy jitter of gas vents, but in gentle, rhythmic pulses. Each pulse matched a heartbeat of its spin. The spectrographs, the instruments that unspooled light into color as one unravels thread, told a second, stranger story. A density less than a tenth of water. Not solid rock, not a dense nucleus. Hollow, perhaps. A shell, a thing with more inside than out. The James Webb Telescope peered at it, and, for a time, all the night sky maps seemed smaller by comparison. We are used to comets with fuzzy comas, gas and dust billowing like poor curtains. Around 3i, Atlas, there was a halo, but it was not ordinary. It glowed a greenhouse green when seen through certain filters, and that glow did not carry the chemical fingerprints we recognized. Some nights, the halo shimmered as if threaded with electric light. Other nights, it lay like a diffidence, a caution against the dark, and there was rhythm. Swift's instruments, quick to catch elusive flashes, reported a precise emission near 497 nanometers. A pure green flicker that pulsed every 22 minutes. Not random noise. Not cellular decay. A metronome. It repeated, patient as tidal breath. When news spreads, it curves the world. Street-side cafes filled with impromptu lectures. Old lovers, separated by years, shared the same headline and felt nearer for it. Schoolchildren made paper models and named them in bright markers. Scientists, the ones with their sleeves always a little peppered with celestial dust, moved like people carrying fragile truths, cautious, thrilled, exhausted. Then came the nights when observatory feeds went silent. Data streams aborted mid-sentence. Schedulers found gaps where there had been none. That is a human drama written in the language of missing zeros and halted timestamps. It made people whisper about control rooms, about intentional curriculums of secrecy. Conspiracy is the shadow cast by fear. It thrives when information contracts and hope inflates. But the instruments that could still see were stubborn. They watched 3i Atlas slow again, and in defiance of many neat equations, nudge its course toward a capture path between Mars and Jupiter. Around us, debate flamed. Capture by gravity or a deliberate change in vector? If a craft could aim, would it loiter in the belt where asteroids ring like dubious sentinels? Or was it choosing a sheltered nursery, a place to rest? There were nights when you could almost expect a word to appear on the dark, a phrase spelled out by the pulsing green. But the sky is not obliged to speak in English. If it speaks at all, it speaks in wavelengths and probabilities, in the elegant coldness of math. So the story turned to the more human elements, the small, stubborn attempts at contact. Messages went up from modest radio arrays in countries that rarely make headlines, sequences of prime numbers, a child's simple song in Morse, a poem recorded at the end of someone's shift. If you think of communication as a bridge, it was as if people everywhere laid down planks, sometimes song, sometimes static, and waited to see if the bridge would be crossed. For a while, nothing came back. Then, in a way that was both subtle and undeniable, instrumentation registered a change in the pulse. The green blink that had been a metronome loosened and stretched, like a hand easing open a fist. There was modulation now, a pattern that mapped not to noise but to structure, a phase within a phase. It invited speculation that was, for once, both scientific and tender. Perhaps the object was trying to understand us, the way a traveler, tasting local words, learns the kindness in a hello. The idea that anything could be engineered by sentience is a heady thing. When the hypothesis surfaces, it draws both the best and worst in us. The wonder of a possible other, and the fearful borrowing of storylines from old science fiction. Many scientists insisted on caution. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, they said. And they were right. But we are also creatures of curiosity, and curiosity walks like a child down a long, dim hallway until there is an open door. In that hallway lived Aria Thorne, an orbital dynamics specialist who taught with hands that always seemed to be explaining something the fingers had just discovered. Aria did not believe in wonders as a religious act. She believed in them as a procedure. Check the numbers, rerun the model, test the instrument. She lived between equations and nights. Her apartment was a small observatory of mugs and data printouts, a map dotted with coffee stains where she had once spilled caffeinated impatience. Aria had, for years, been studying small bodies that danced too neatly to be chaotic. She loved patterns the way some people loved music. So when the 3I, Atlas pulse, matched a rotational period and then modulated in ways that hinted at purpose, she stopped sleeping properly. She leaned into the data and let nights unwind into code and graphs. The first time she walked to the window and saw the object through the blind light of the city, she felt the strange sensation of meeting an animal that knows your name. It was not that the object glowed like a city beacon. It was that the world around her seemed quieter, as if the universe had shifted to make room for a conversation. Her colleagues sent messages that were halfway between professional rigor and personal bewilderment. The scientific community is a common language, but in those days it was also a living thing, the way a village shares news by hearth. Labs coordinated. Amateur astronomers in remote provinces picked up the thread. Their little telescopes, like lighthouses for the curious. Someone in a small island nation discovered a frequency offset that tied to the 22-minute pulse. Someone else found micro-variations in light that matched plausible structural reflections. The pattern of discovery was not clean or linear. It was messy and generous, a collaborative art. When the object's path bent toward a more stable orbit, the world held its breath. Imagine, for a moment, a cosmic stranger deciding to lodge itself in our backyard. Planets are practical things. They hold onto objects with gravity's patient fingers, and capture means presence. For some, the capture meant danger of foreign artifact near our homes. For others, it meant company, a chance to study without hurry. Arya argued for restraint and curiosity in equal measure. If 3I, Atlas, carried intelligence, she reasoned, we must be careful not to frighten it. If it did not, we must still treat it as an unprecedented chance to learn. On a moonlit night, she sent a test. Not a shout, but a handshake, a radio sequence of simple mathematical constants, followed by a recording of rain on tin, the sound of home in a universal rhythm. She thought of signals as translations of intent. Answer came not as words, but as nuance. The green blink shifted to match a component of Arya's signal, not copying, but echoing. The echo was garbled, but unmistakable, like the alteration of a song when a new choir learns it. Scientists called it reciprocity. For those who had pumped waves into the dark, it felt like a nod. Rumors blossomed in parallel to the science. Some claimed that agencies around the world were hiding whole chunks of data. Others swore they had seen ships, military vessels, repositioning beneath the quiet sky. People who live by rumor are not always malicious. Sometimes they are simply human, trying to stitch meaning into uncertainty. The truth, like much truth, lodged in a place between extremes. Not all data was withheld, but not all data was shared promptly. Bureaucracy and caution are mortal foils to enthusiasm. It was a woman in the Azores, a retired schoolteacher with a battered camera and a habit of photographing ships at dusk, who caught something everyone else had missed. She sent the picture to a mailing list of enthusiasts and, in the margin of her email, added, I can't prove it, but the light was like the inside of a watch. The photograph showed a faint, comet-like object with an odd shadowing that suggested internal cavities. The internet, as it is wont to do, turned that whisper into chorus. Filmmakers started planning documentaries before the scientific press released full papers. Lovers wrote poems and posted them in small, tender fonts on pages where astronomy and yearning met. The object's green halo continued to puzzle. Spectroscopy suggested the emission might not be chemical at all, but plasma-like, an ionized environment dancing in magnetic loops. Magnetism is the secret path of many cosmic interactions. It can steer dust, it can sculpt the shape of a glow, and most importantly, it can be shaped by the intention of a structure designed to manipulate fields rather than shove matter. Engineers argued that creating a large, light, hollow structure that could exploit stellar radiation or magnetic fields to maneuver was within the bounds of sophisticated technology. The idea was not cheap science fiction. It was engineering stretched to the ambitious edge. The more Arya thought about it, the more she saw the design logic, a shell that trades mass for maneuverability, a surface that learns to whisper to charged particles. If natural processes can mimic some of that behavior, she admitted, the match would still be improbable. Over cups of too strong coffee, committees assembled to plan a measured response. There were proposals for probes, for gentle flybys that would learn composition and structure. Some proposed a more audacious approach. Send an emissary payload that would orbit the object like a small, civil-mannered friend. The plans were expensive, and expense breeds delay, so the world waited and watched. And then, one evening, the object did something that no simulation had predicted. It adjusted its pulse in a way that favored a particular band of radio frequencies, as if nudging an ear toward the human chatter below. The effect was small but symbolic. For the first time, Our collective noise and its green pulse entered an alignment, a patterned duet. For Aria and many others, the moment was less an answer than an invitation. We are wired to anthropomorphize. We love the idea of intent because it gives us the pleasure of recognition. But alongside that human yearning, many voices reminded everyone of the scales involved. Any entity that could travel between stars had a patience whose length mocked human schedules. Our hurry is a short instrument. This thing could afford to wait. It may have no interest in the petty concerns of our politics or our fear. It might have been passing, a mariner looking for a pause in a long voyage. Yet we could not help ourselves. The public began to dream in broad, earnest ways. Artists painted the halo in colors physics could not name. Children insisted that the object be given a friendlier name than 3I Atlas, and so drew stars into letters and called it green light. Newspapers printed speculative editorials alongside op-eds about the need for global cooperation. For a while, the word cosmos took on a softer weight. It was not only distant physics, but a place where something might sit and read our postcards. When the first amateur radio operator, a man who lived with more wires than furniture and had fingers stained by old solder, recorded a reply that mapped to one of his own simple sequences, the logs filled with messages of jubilation. It was not so much that any single person had gained a declarative answer. It was that the sky had admitted the possibility of two-way attention. The world, for a thin slice of nights, felt smaller in the most consoling sense. But with intimacy comes the question of motive, and with motive comes unease. If the object was engineered, who sent it? Where did they come from? Were they explorers, observers, surveyors, or something else? The public conversation shifted, not toward panic, but toward a sober wonder. Philosophers were invited on broadcasts, and poets read in the glow of telescopes. Small rituals emerged in cities. Neighborhoods turned out lanterns one evening and hummed recorded rain, as if inviting a guest into a courtyard. Aria often thought about the object not as an enemy nor a savior, but as an argument. It forced humanity to choose how to behave when faced with the unknown. Would we respond with generosity and curiosity? With territorialism and fear? She wrote papers with painstaking caveats and also tried to write letters to the general public in plain language, urging patience and a thoughtful stance. Science is a method, she wrote, but it is also a habit of kindness toward truth. Careful listening, slow response, an acknowledgement that our models are maps and not the terrain itself. Months slipped like soft coins into a fountain. The object settled into a lopsided orbit, a new permanent sort of visitor sitting between Mars and Jupiter like an unspectacular gate. It did not present open doors or harsh demands. Instead, it continued its steady pulse, sometimes brisker, sometimes more languid. It rotated with the uncanny steadiness of a clockwork animal. In the quiet times, and there were quiet times, long afternoons when nothing seemed to happen, people learned to look at the night again as a shared apparatus of attention. Amateur skywatching groups cropped up in suburbs and urban rooftops. Children learned to identify constellations and the names of telescopes, as if learning the titles of new friends. The flood of conspiracy news slowly ebbed, replaced by slow non-fiction papers that walked readers through methodology and measurement with a human voice. One winter, when the nights were clear and the world smelled of wet pavement, Aria found herself sitting in a small room in the observatory, her hands wrapped around a mug gone cold. She had a folder of printed telemetry and a single line written in a margin by an undergraduate intern in a messy, hopeful script. If they are listening, we should tell them what we love. The thought lodged itself in her like a small compass needle, So she arranged a transmission, not an offer, but an offering. A patchwork of small human things, a set of prime numbers, the notation of a lullaby, the frequencies of whale song, the rhythm of a heartbeat recorded from a newborn in a distant hospital. With permission, the smell of rain approximated in waveform, things meant not to coerce, but to reveal. The message was small and human and oddly brave. It was the equivalent of setting a place at a dinner table and hoping the guest would not mind. For a time, nothing came. And then, in the same way the earth moves and the tide answers the moon, after an interval we cannot perceive until the water is already out, the object modified its green pulse and, in a pattern that was not direct copying but a gentle reshaping, repeated a motif from the lullaby. It was not a translation, it was a reflection. If an answer is a mirror, this was the kind of mirror that yields back what you look like when you are being kind. There are things in the world that change us, not by cataclysm, but by example. The presence of 3I, Atlas, became one of those things. A slow education in how to be patient, how to treat the unknown with a measure of courtesy we had not practiced enough. We made new committees and revised old protocols. We drafted treaties that opened pathways for shared calm. And at the most human level, people sat on rooftops and pointed at the green glow and imagined what the journey must have been like for something to cross the gulf between stars. Years later, when the object had become less headline and more fixture, a child in a small city who had grown up watching the pulses and who had learned to hum the lullaby as one of the minor domestic songs, stood in an observatory with her science fair project and wondered how to say thank you to something that had altered a culture without a single manifesto. She sent a drawing into space on a quiet daytime radio beam, a circle with a dot in the middle, encircled by dots of many colors, an invitation to sit, to look, to be curious. Whether anyone on the object side ever received the drawing is a question that sits patiently in a drawer, marked, might be answered later. It was also the simplest science, taking data and making meaning, converting space between hearts with signals that are at once arbitrary and essential. If you look up now, tonight, from wherever your eyes tilt to the dark, you might catch the faint memory of its green halo, or you might see ordinary stars only. Either is a kind of miracle. The story did not resolve into answers that fit neatly into a textbook. It remained, instead, an invitation to the long practice of learning. It taught us how to wait without paranoia, how to respond without arrogance, how to treat a visitor like a neighbor until it proved otherwise. So when the night deepens and the lamp beside your bed warms the page of whatever you hold, think of this small, steady object that slowed in our sky and pulsed with a rhythm we could recognize. Think of the scientists who stayed up late and the amateur astronomer with the battered camera. Think of that fallen cup of coffee and a note in a margin about what we love. Think, too, of how a world divided by so many small grievances can, for a moment, look up together and be humbled by the strange courtesy of the cosmos. Good night, from Bedtime Universe. If you feel moved, tell us in the comments where you are and what time it is. Let the green light of your place shine in our map, and sleep, knowing the sky is a little fuller, a little kinder, and that we are learning the long, patient language of listening.